a sort of change in gear. If you remember the tutorial Friday, what did we say that Heckscher-Ohlins story model was good for in terms of describing trade? What trade is described reasonably well? Yeah, but I mean between which sort of countries?
Oh. Big ones and small ones? Rich and poor?
Yeah, and that's right. Exactly. So between north-south trade, between, say, labour and countries with a strong endowment of labour, abundant endowment of labour, so you can think of, say, countries like the US trading with China, and yes, you have, say, China exporting things that are labour intensive, and importing some things that are more capital intensive, such as chemicals or capital equipment, or that sort of thing. So, at describing this north-south trade, it does quite well. But where it doesn't do quite so well is saying, how do we explain all the trade that goes on between countries that, in terms of factor endowments, are actually quite similar? So if you think of, say, trade between Canada and the US, or between France and Germany, or whatever, this sort of trade. And often that sort of trade is intra-industry trade. So it could be furniture or something like that, shipped both from country A, exported from country A to country B, and also exported the other way, from country B to country A. But of course, when you think about it, furniture is not all the same. It's not potatoes or something like that. There is some product differentiation. So if we're able to understand, say, trade between different EU countries, that sort of thing, very traditional, very sort of standard, if you like, Heckscher-Ohlins framework, or the broader framework even, that is set in that so-called standard model, doesn't help us all that much. So what we're doing now, in this lecture, is looking at a case of where we're introducing imperfect competition into our model. Now this will give us quite a different kind of flavour to what's going on, because here it's a case of the direction of trade. What sort of trade we're going to get is far more ambiguous. So we have this material here from chapter 7, and we have a neat little example from Noel Gaston. I don't know if any of you remember Noel. So Noel, I've been here for many years, now moved on. Productivity Commission. And we'll say more about the Productivity Commission and some of those over the decades. Later in this course, we'll talk about policy. So if we have a world where we do have increasing returns to scale, we might have trade going on, countries benefiting from trade, even if the two countries that are trading with each other are complete clones of each other. So you could have two countries that are complete clones. Not only do they have the same endowment, same technology, but also have the same endowment. So they're complete clones. In the world we have looked at, with constant returns to scale and so forth, well, they have no gains they could achieve from trading. They don't have different comparative advantage. But you can see intuitively, if it was a case of increased increasing in terms of scale. So, one of them produces product A and produces it more cheaply than if product A was produced in both countries, then you can see how that's a gain. Along these lines, you can sort of see how the rest of the world disappeared. It wouldn't be all that great for the US, but it wouldn't be as bad as if you just had Iceland, the rest of the world disappeared. Because, of course, you would have Iceland operating with these industries producing things at a very inefficiently low level of scale of production. So, this is Noel's cutesy little example. Suppose we have two countries in the world, and unlike reality, let's suppose these two countries are clones of each other. They're exactly the same. Here are these two cars. One called Camry, one called Corolla.
So both countries have the same factors of production?
Yeah, exactly. Two countries are clones of each other. Same production possibility countries. So it's not a case of being able to say obviously what's going to happen, which country is going to specialise in which. Because it's not a case of a country having a comparative advantage in Camrys or a comparative advantage in Corollas. But with increasing in terms of scale, we can see mutual gains from trade. So, this is the economies of scale story, the increasing returns of scale story. If we were to have used 100 inputs of labour, we could produce 10 Camrys and 10 Corollas. But if you double the amount of inputs, if you have 200, then what have you got? You've got not the output of both cars doubling, you've got more than doubling. You've got 30 of each cars. Okay, so if we're going to have a car being produced using 200 units of labour, what are we going to do? Well, we'd have to use all of the labour in this world. We'd have to use all of the labour in one country. All of the labour in one country to produce, to specialise in producing one of the cars. So, without trade, with 100 workers devoted to producing Camrys, 100 workers devoted to producing Corollas in both countries. Well, each country would be producing 10 Camrys, 10 Corollas. Altogether in the world there'd be 10 Camrys, 20 Camrys and 20 Corollas. And then, with trade, we could have this possibility of Japan specialises in producing Camrys, and got 200 workers, so it could produce 30 Camrys. Australia produces 30 Corollas. And you can see that this is gain for the whole world. Production was 20 and 20, the whole world. Now it's 30 and 30. So everyone's better off. But you can see it's quite arbitrary that Japan is producing the Camrys and Australia is producing the Corollas. You can see that is a quite arbitrary thing going on there. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better to produce 15 of each?
But you don't get the economies of scale. I mean, we just looked at our two possibilities here. We haven't said what the costs are of 15 and 15, but what we have said, when we go back, is that if we've got in any one country a workforce of 200, so we can split them in half and use 100 for Camry and 100 for Corolla. Or we can just produce one or the other and get 30 of one or the other. So that's our story there. It's that increasing return story. Of course, it could be the other way around. So unlike the earlier stuff we've seen with our Cardian model or our Schroven story, where one of the countries has a comparative advantage in doing one thing, and one of the countries has a comparative advantage in doing the other thing. We don't have that story coming through here. So it could have been the other way around, the way around we first saw, or it could be this way around. And in world terms, you get the same outcome of 30 and 30. And this is making a point about this intra-industry trade, this increasing returns sort of trade story. In terms of being able to predict the trade flows, how they're going to work out, which country is going to specialise in what, we don't get sort of clear, unambiguous answers. But what we do get is the idea that there can get these gains from trade, even though the countries are clones of each other. Now here's a point that the book makes quite a lot of, and we'll look at in the tutorials as well, at some stage. And that is this idea that not only talking about the standard story with increasing returns, this internal increasing returns, we can talk about that of course, this idea that, okay, you have a steel plant, and if you're operating at a very small scale, then it can be very costly sort of steel you're producing. So we have this story here, this internal increasing returns to scale story. But we can also talk about a somewhat more, I suppose, subtle idea of external increasing returns to scale. This idea that if you're producing something or other, then that's going to be, if a firm is producing something or other, so a firm is, say, producing IT type stuff in Silicon Valley, well, it can gain from all of the other firms who are doing stuff in the same area, because there's a highly specialised labour force that's available. There can be highly specialised input suppliers in that area. Technological transfer can be generally known that new things are being come up with, and as employees go from firm to firm or start their own firms, there are all these advantages of being close together. Okay, so if we think of internal economies of scale, well, you can think of traditional manufacturing and having high upfront fixed costs. And in case of saying, look, we've got certain fixed costs, and if we don't sell enough of what we're producing, we're not really even covering our fixed costs. So 2 years ago we had the very last of the Australian-produced Mitsubishi's, the 380 model. So we came up with this new model, marketed it, of course had to come up with the Pacific model, Pacific type things, for, I guess, stamping out body panels, all of this sort of stuff. So there's all these upfront fixed costs. And of course, it's only going to break even if they sold enough 380s, which they did. So Mitsubishi said, well, we've had enough of this manufacturing in Australia of models that sell a relatively small amount, sort of small scale production stuff. Just simply doesn't pay. You're going to stop our Australian production. So if we turn to, I sort of alluded to this a bit earlier, this idea of external economies of scale, well, there are just various reasons. So if you think of Silicon Valley, smaller scale, you might think of the film and special effects type industries in Wellington, New Zealand, so-called Wellingwood or whatever. If you have a particular area where there are a number of different firms and they're all getting an advantage over being close to each other, there are these factors like specialised suppliers, particularly if the supply is not sort of obvious thing, but some sort of special custom type supplies that you need. You want to be near these people. Labour market pooling. There's a group of people out there with special skills. Be hired, sort of thing. It's close. Actually have a look at them rather than getting them a long way away and so forth. And this whole idea of knowledge spillovers. So you might be able to spy on competitors if they're close to you. You also might hire some of their best employees, that sort of thing, pick up on what they're doing and so forth. And so yes, you can think of various examples where you get these economies coming about. It's not traditional economies of scale, rather it's a sort of Silicon Valley type story. So, when we think about imperfect competition, of course we've seen this idea in a principles course. And of course, what we have with imperfect competition is some element of market power. Even if it's quite sort of a subtle sort of market power. Now, we make use of the monopolistic competition model. The monopolistic competition, what can we say? It first originated in the 1920s. So we had scholars saying, look, we've got a monopoly model on one hand, perfect competition model on the other hand. But surely there's a lot of examples out there of markets where there are many firms, but to call them perfect competition isn't quite correct. So you have this idea of monopolistic competition where there's some product differentiation. And I guess for quite a few decades, people said, yeah, that's sort of interesting. It's a good thing to teach students. It gives a richer story. But what can we particularly make of it? Perhaps the more powerful models of the two extreme opposites, the monopoly model and the perfect competition model. But by the 1970s, trade theorists, international trade economists, are saying, okay, we want to think closely about this whole idea of intra-industry trade. I.e. countries, say France and Germany, both exporting furniture to each other. How can we sort of understand that, get a handle on that? Well, the furniture is clearly going to be differentiated goods. Each furniture producer, whether they be located in France or whether they be located in Germany, are going to produce a slightly different product. So a natural fit, so to speak, is a monopolistic competition model. Before we even get on to monopolistic competition, we can draw this difference between a competitive story perfectly competitive story and one that's imperfectly competitive. So we have the competitive firm's demand curve, which is simply the market price they face. And all they do is say, look, I'm facing this particular price, I'm just going to decide upon how much quantity that I sell. So that's your perfect competition story. Now with monopoly, of course, we have a case of where the demand curve is downward sloping.
So what was that first graph for again?
So this is your perfect competition story. This is your monopoly story. We're just making a very, very simple story here of a case of where there is a degree of market power, a degree to be able to set your price associated with not just monopoly, but anywhere where there's an element of market power. And of course, if we can sketch out our monopoly picture, like shown in the book. So another monopoly story coming about through, this is a relationship between revenue, this is a relationship with cost. Maybe it wouldn't be a monopoly story if the amount of demand was really huge, but this level of demand, we've got this sort of natural monopoly story. Cost. So there we've got where marginal revenue and marginal cost equal each other. Okay. And we can say, what else can we say? Well, we can say, look, got the idea of monopoly profit. So we've got these two contrasting stories, the perfect competition story, a monopoly story, but what we're really going to focus on and making use of is this idea of monopolistic competition.
So what's that under price of the monopoly? Average revenue?
Yes, that's right, average cost.
Average cost.
Yes, so we've got an average cost curve there. When it's declining, the marginal cost is below it. When it's increasing, the marginal cost is above it. Okay.